Maybe just to start off with right away is that I'm just one of the policymakers, right? And therefore I will put out the wishes of one of the policymakers. And for those who don't know, I'm now active in the Parliament for more than 10 years in the Green Party. So let's be full transparent about that as well. So thank you and daring of you to invite me here. But I do think, and that's going to be my main message, is that if we are looking at the future of livestock, we cannot only look at technological solutions only. And to be very honest, if I go through your website and also through the presentations, and I'm sure there will be fascinating talks coming to us, but in the end, technology fixes only will not do the job. And that is certainly, from the outside world, also the demands that will coming towards the livestock sector. It's not only about climate. You will see that next year biodiversity will really emerge as a very important topic, because it's 2020 next year. There will be a global summit in China on biodiversity, which a part of the society hopes that that will be the Paris moment for biodiversity. So that it will mean that the Convention on Biological Diversity will really take stock and take action in preserving our biodiversity. But also Europe will have to revise its biodiversity strategy, because we have agreed as Europe to hold loss of biodiversity until 2020. 2020 is next year, and I can already tell you we did not meet it. We are still seeing a decline of biodiversity within Europe. So that target will also have to be met. Then on top of that, you will have an increasing demand on animal welfare. So also these kind of demands, these societal demands, all need to come together and need to be met by the sector. And there, absolutely, technical solutions will play a role, but everything together, it cannot fit. And I think I have to take you a bit then to the Netherlands, because I'm not only a member of the Green Party here, I'm also from the Netherlands. So, and as you are maybe aware, in the Netherlands we have a specific situation with nitrogen at the moment. And I think it's something we need to learn from. To learn from what has been going wrong for years. And that was that the government, the Dutch government, for many years tried to make all the different demands fit in a very small, densely populated country, which also still wants to preserve some of its biodiversity. By the way, we don't have that much left. So in that sense, there is really a big, and you know that of course Netherlands is known for its very intensive farming, a large agriculture sector. We are the second largest exporter in the world. Only the United States is bigger in that. So that's an achievement where some people are very proud of, but it comes at a cost. And the biggest cost is what we are basically doing, and this is a bit of the model that Europe is doing as well, but the Netherlands is augmented it and is doing it in full scale. What we're doing is we are importing nitrogen from outside Europe, think Brazil. We are of course storing nitrogen from the air into fertilizer. We are making products with that, and we are left with the manure. And that is then in several ways coming on to our soils and our water. Someone can tell you that is going to, at a certain moment, not meet. The Dutch government thought that we could solve it all with technical solutions, and sometimes even saying that we can say yes to projects because the nitrogen will be mitigated with future technologies. And that was really a calculation system that the government used for that, until the beginning of this year the court said, it's not allowed, it's illegal. And suddenly we are now in the situation that no project can be started, because now every project immediately has to show how it will reduce the nitrogen pressure on mainly Natura 2000 areas. And that is of course very difficult. So for the moment we have every project, not only farming, but also construction projects, that are all being stalled and halted. So this is a bit the background why now almost every week you have protesters from different sectors coming to The Hague, which is then where the capital, where the government is, to tell them do something about it. But now suddenly you have a government who for 10 years promised that we can all fix it technologically, sitting with the back to the wall, and now have to come into measures that go beyond issues that they ever were thinking of or were allowed to think of what they think. And one of those solutions that will be on the table, whether you like it or not, is halving our livestock in the Netherlands. It's being put forward by some of the politicians. I'm not saying it should be 50% or whatsoever, but that you see that we have such a huge livestock sector in such a small country with such a huge, mainly nitrogen pressure, something has to give. And I think that's exactly also the discussion we need to have at Europe, because if there is hopefully one lesson from that, is let at least not fully copy that strategy towards Europe. That we are pretending that it can all be met, animal welfare, climate mitigation, biodiversity preservation, and a booming sector that's where the sky is the limit, phosphate, etc., all the nutrients out there, and that we just can increase it, and that then at a certain moment we find out it doesn't fit, and then what? And I think that is really something we need to prepare for, and that is something that I think should be at the core of a discussion when we are talking about the future of livestock in Europe. I'm not of the school to say there is no future for livestock. There is, no problem. But probably not in the same amount as we're talking, in the same numbers as we talk about now. And so we have to think how, for example, CAP reform can really help us in a transition to a more sustainable level of livestock. And to be very honest, the current proposals on the table are not doing that. So I know DG Agri is in the room. The current proposals are not preparing us for a real transition towards sustainability. And to be very honest, the Commission knows. Because the new Commissioner is already talking about a from farm to fork strategy as part of the Green Deal. And I could never really understand why we are already talking about a from farm to fork strategy when we are still in the middle of the CAP reform. As if we already know that the CAP reform will not give us the full transition that we need, and therefore we are already thinking of a strategy that probably will fix the errors of the CAP reform that is still on the table. I find it a bit of a losing strategy, but okay, let's go in that direction, but then we have to think of where can livestock indeed contribute to mitigation? Where can that be? But where will we run into issues around preservation of biodiversity? How can we make sure that our agriculture model will be much more in conjunction with forestry, with nature? These kind of issues need to be answered, and that also needs to be stimulated when we are talking about CAP reform. And that needs to be stimulated with much more bindingness than leaving it to the countries. Otherwise, you leave it to strategies like in the Netherlands. I don't think that's a wise strategy from a European level. So this renationalization where you are putting some of the demands towards the countries, but in the end not with very clear indicators, not with very binding reduction targets, it's a recipe for failure. And the only thing you will see is totally different solutions all over the EU, which will not help us at all. So we are very much concerned about that CAP reform and whether that will help us towards a transition. We will still try to fix that in the CAP reform that is on the table. We did that in the Environment Committee. We know that in the Parliament then you have an Agriculture Committee with a slightly different opinion. So that fight is still on the table, and then we have to fight with the Member States. But let's try to grasp the momentum of this CAP reform, and let's try to keep ahead of the societal wishes. Otherwise the society will catch up and you will be stuck and will be forced to very sudden measures that probably you don't want to. Last point, if you are going down that route and going down a sincere transition to a more sustainable level of agriculture, we should never forget also that this is and this should be in the interest of the farmers. And this is of course about fair pricing. And that should never be forgotten when we are discussing the future, because at the current moment, there is no fair pricing to farmers. And in the current model, we are forcing farmers to go to larger and larger scale farming just because otherwise they cannot make enough money. Because the value chain where the profits are, it's in the middle, where the supermarkets are, where they have the power in the food chain, where you have many producers, many consumers, and few intermediates. And that's where the power is, and that's where the profits are. If we cannot change that model, you will never get the farmers on your side for such a transition. And I would even almost say, I can understand why. But since things have to give, let's also focus on making sure that we can create a fair price for our food. Yes, that will mean meat will get more expensive. It will mean that. But that's a logical consequence if you talk about fair pricing and the pressure on our environmental systems. And I know people will say there are no simplifications possible on the environmental footprint. You can all discuss that, but you all know that these are the societal demands coming at you. Better prepare for them instead of being surprised by them later on, because then everyone is worse off. With that, I would like to conclude, and I hope I am within my time. Thank you very much. I thought there was time for questions or not?
Well, 5 minutes for questions.
5 minutes for questions.
Robert McLeod from ICE Robotics. What can civil society do to prepare both the willingness of the public to pay more, the ability of farmers to invest more, because farmers are very constrained, and that part in the middle, the buyers, the supermarkets, and to the processors, to facilitate this ability to pay more, because there are competing pressures in here that are constraining this happening. It's very difficult for farmers to invest when supermarkets are pressuring the prices they're paying and consumers want cheaper and cheaper products.
Yeah. Your first question was on what can civil society do? I think in the end there's a lot of political decisions that have to be taken in order to make this all happen. So civil society should certainly always put pressure on the policymakers, because I'm always getting a bit nervous when people say, yeah, we have to prepare the consumers. I think consumers are way further already than policymakers. I think where the slowness more is at the policy-making side than at the consumer side. But consumers want to see fairness. If they move towards a certain new model where they pay more, they want to have the feeling that it's also changing something, that it's for the good, that it's for the better. And their credibility of policymakers is crucial. And on the 3 aspects that you mentioned, on all 3 aspects we need to move. First of all, on the financing. You're absolutely right that if we are not very carefully looking at how can we also steer our financial flows towards that sustainability, then we're doing it wrong. This is why I'm happy that the new Commission is talking about a sustainable investment plan, which hopefully will also have a large section on agriculture. And this is also why I'm also at the same time working on a file called Sustainable Finance, where we are trying to define what are green finances, which enables these transitions and where the financial flow can go towards those transitions, and that it's going to be attractive for financial players to put their money there. So I think that's certainly, so there's a lot of rule making around around sustainable finance, around a sustainable investment plan where you can lead the way as EU, that is very crucial. Your other point on the supermarkets, the power of the supermarkets, we took our first steps there. But in the end, here we come to a dilemma which Europe has not fully solved yet, probably, is that Europe, for too long, has always put the internal market as the sacred cow that should be achieved without any doubt. I'm not saying that that should not be an aim, but there are, of course, differences. There are sometimes issues where we may have to think on helping the farmers, allowing the farmers to really have a better negotiation position. Which means, in an internal market setting, yes, they can do price agreements together, which should be allowed. in order to be stronger towards the supermarket players. But also the supermarket players should be more regulated. This should not be just a pure market, because as I said, in that food system model, those few players have the monopoly position. And of course they can play farmers against each other. That's what they're doing. So I think there also policymakers should not refrain from. And then third, it's the public acceptance. As I said, if they have the feeling it's leading to a shift in finances, that the big banks, like in the Netherlands, the Rabobank is also making changes there, that you see that it's indeed leading to fair pricing, consumers are willing to take a step. I'm absolutely sure about that. But then you also, as a government, need to explain that and need to put that on the agenda. And I always give the example of smoking, where 20 years ago, and you would say in a room, there's a lot of regulation against smoking coming up, they would have laughed at you and they would have thrown you out of the room. See how fast acceptance of the audience has changed towards policies against smoking. This shows that people can change, the attitude can change. But you need to be consistent, you need to have a good story, and you need to be credible. Well, I think on all issues we are failing for the moment. And then you can't expect us, the consumers, just to do it. Yeah.
So the last question.
Yes, I have the microphone. Wolfgang Vogt. I'm in DG Santé and I'm involved in the Green Deal or Farm to Fork strategy for
Good luck.
sustainable.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I have a provocative question to you. You mentioned, or you described, first of all, that the CAP reform plans, they didn't deliver on sustainability. But on the same time, you describe the problems in terms of sustainability for your country, for the Netherlands. And my thesis is that these problems, they are more and more caused by livestock farming systems that are out of the CAP in terms of, let's say, intensive poultry or even intensive pig production. They don't get any CAP money, so they are out of the system. So I don't think you can fix the problem or make the livestock farming more sustainable if you only say the CAP reform is the key to fix.
I would say the CAP reform is key now. I'm not saying that we probably need a from farm to fork strategy afterwards, and I fully understand that you are making that point, of course, since you're also working on it. But this is exactly the moment when we are discussing an option, a possibility for policymakers with even money behind to do some changes. And it's absolutely true that for the moment, money is mainly going to other sectors. But that's not forgiven, is it? If you are asking changes from the sector, you also need to be ready to also put your money where your mouth is. And there, the CAP reform will have more money than you in your from farm to fork strategy. And that's for sure. Or you think you will have 130 billion euros per year in your from...
Any money.
Exactly. That's my point. So that's why I said it would be a defeating strategy if we are letting this CAP reform slip and then later on try to fix it with a from farm to fork strategy, whereas the CAP reform has quite some strong measures, strong handles to change policies. And that's why I said, I'm not saying that then in the end there is not a from farm to fork strategy needed, but I really would like to grasp the momentum also now.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.